Welcome to this conversation about human rights and why they matter. My name is Pepijn Gerrits, or Pepijn Gerrits, and I'm the Executive Director of the Netherlands Helsinki Committee. The Netherlands Helsinki Committee has been working to defend human rights, the rule of law and democracy in all countries of Europe since 1987. We work with partners throughout the broader region to strengthen legal protection and improve public policies that affect vulnerable or disadvantaged groups. We strive to reform the systems of criminal justice to ensure equal treatment before the law. We support human rights NGOs and defenders to withstand governmental pressure. And we work to ensure the effective implementation of international human rights agreements and the rule of law. To give you two examples of NHC's engagement, I would like to highlight the coalition we are building in member states of the European Union to involve civil society organizations in monitoring the rule of law by engaging with parliaments and state institutions. Another example is our support to civil society organizations in the countries of the Eastern Partnership, which provides assistance to people in closed institutions and detention centers during the COVID-19 pandemic. So why are we here today? As the NHC, we believe safeguarding human rights is the responsibility of everyone. Unfortunately, we've seen that in the past years, those who stand up for human rights have increasingly come under pressure. Between the denial of basic freedoms to shrinking space for civic engagement and backsliding of the rule of law, more and more obstacles and dangers have been placed on their path. We need to increase the support for these human rights defenders, as they are not only defending their own rights, but the rights of all of us. We also need to speak about human rights in terms that relate to the citizens. We need to build stronger constituencies, as our panel will also highlight in a moment. For this reason, in cooperation with human rights activists from across Europe, today we are launching the Bring Human Rights Home campaign. Through this campaign, we will be sharing stories of everyday people from 8 different countries who have stood up for human rights. Despite the many challenges they had to overcome, the individuals behind these stories did not back down. They reclaimed their rights for themselves, their communities, and ultimately for all of us. Their stories stand as a powerful reminder that we all can and must stand up for human rights. With this event, we do not only want to kick off our campaign, but also a timely and much needed conversation about why human rights matter. Before we start, I want to thank all our partners from Azerbaijan, Hungary, Kazakhstan, the Netherlands, Poland, Russia, Turkey, and Ukraine for their efforts in helping us putting together this great campaign. Building these kind of partnerships and bolstering these networks of action in solidarity are at the core of NHC's vision. Together, we always stand stronger. I would also like to thank the National Postcode Lottery for their generous support in making this campaign possible. They care about civic space in Europe. I would now like to give the floor to our moderator for today's event, Mr. Jelle Brandkorstius. Jelle is a journalist and documentary filmmaker. Previously, he served as a Dutch news correspondent in Russia and is the author of numerous travel documentaries and books covering Russia, Eastern Europe, and Caucasus. Jelle, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Pepijn. Gerrits, who is of course the executive director of the Netherlands Helsinki Committee. We are sitting here in a studio in The Hague, and to my left, or maybe it's to my right, You never know how it goes on the other side of the screen. To my left or right is Kirsten Meerschaert. Welcome. Who's working as a program manager, human rights defense for the Netherlands Helsinki Committee, and we'll be talking a bit more later. Welcome also the speakers who are not here in The Hague. We'll be discussing, of course, everything a bit later. And also welcome the audience, hopefully from all across Europe, for this special event. I'm really happy that we're able to have such an event in the middle of a pandemic to reflect on human rights, because I think personally that human rights are really at the core of what makes us human. Like Pepijn mentioned, I used to work in Moscow as a correspondent. And before that time, human rights was something a bit vague, a bit abstract. I grew up in Holland, where, well, obviously not all the time human rights are respected, but I didn't really run into any violations of that. My time in Russia was different. And the things that you take for granted growing up in a democracy are not, of course, as normal in authoritarian countries like Russia, such as the rule of law, or that the police should be on your side. And this is really something that made me think about human rights. And I guess that's what this event is all about. It's about, and this campaign as well, it's about how to mobilize people to care about violation of human rights, or to be at least aware of what human rights actually are. So later we are going to hear stories from Hungary and Ukraine and the Netherlands that concern human rights. But we would also like to hear from you, from the audience. And for that, we have a Mentimeter site, which is, if everything goes well, it will be a link to this site in the chat screen. So what you do is you click on the link, you will be sent to a page on the browser, and there you need to put in a code. The code is also added in the chat as well. Let me just say it just in case. It's whoop. It just disappeared and I really have a bad memory. It's 74890896. So if you put that in, you will see the question, the first question, and that is, which words do you associate with human rights? We're planning to make a kind of a word web. So while you, the audience, are hopefully putting in as much input as possible, I'd like to hear from my guests in the studio here. Well, for me, the interest in human rights was kind of kindled in Moscow. Do you remember like a clear moment, for Pepijn and for Kirsten as well, this question, that you got interested in human rights? Was it like an event, or did you study something? Or
I have to say that my upbringing was one that had it quite at the forefront. My mother, she was a child of the 60s in the United States. My father was Dutch and was born in the midst of World War II here in the Netherlands. So I kind of grew up in a setting that was a bit more aware, perhaps, as you alluded to earlier, than some others. But I remember a crucial moment was when my mother took me down for a march on Washington, D.C. in defense of women's rights. And just seeing these masses of people, genders, non-genders, all there as a collective to claim these rights that we have. I mean, there shouldn't be a debate about whether they exist, and yet, unfortunately, there still is. And I have to say that if I can put my finger to one particular touchstone, it would be that experience. I was probably about 16 when it happened.
Okay.
So.
I guess a march can be so important that you can really feel you're not alone.
Indeed.
Right? Yeah. And Pepijn, do you have also, did you march as well?
Well, I
rights?
marched, but
Why not?
But it was a bit. That was prior to me marching, actually, that I came aware of human rights. I had the privilege to grow up in Peru, in Latin America. And while we lived there, there was a dictatorship going on, end of the 70s. So I frequently saw people being picked up by military, well, trucks, actually, and seeing them beaten, actually, in public. So with my 6, 7, 8 years, I knew this was not right. This was not how it should be. So that is a very clear memory.
I can imagine that it really energizes you to be interested
Absolutely.
in the subject. Hopefully by now we should have some results from on the Mentimeter. And as you can see, the bigger the words get, the more often it's mentioned. I see dignity, equality, freedom. I also see a couple of words that I cannot read, and I forgot my glasses again. So I'll pick those up later. But democracy, obviously, yeah, that makes sense. Fundamental, yeah. It's, I guess, the fundament that everything rests upon. So we'll be returning to this Mentimeter a couple of times during this event. It's great that everybody's putting in input. Hopefully everybody will keep doing that. But for now, I'd like to elaborate on this topic with our keynote speaker for this event. And that is Caroline de Gruyter, who's joining us through Zoom. Hi, Caroline.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yes, it's an honor to have you. Caroline is EU correspondent for the Dutch daily NRC, but also for Belgian daily De Standaard, among other media. And she just wrote a terrific book on the Habsburg Empire and its similarities, its striking similarities with the European Union. Caroline, can you tell me, has there been already an English translation of the book?
Not so fast, but there will most probably be a German translation, which is
excellent.
First step is a German step, but there's some talks with English publishers as well.
Okay, well, for the international audience, keep an eye on this book because it's really a good read, also to reflect on the European Union. Caroline, I would like to give you the virtual, in this case, stage for your keynote speech. Go ahead.
Well, thank you. And I just want to discuss the evolvement and the evolution of human rights in Europe's recent history with you, because you know, we talk about it a lot in Europe all the time. I'm covering European issues, but human rights are very much to the forefront of this. But many of us think that it's always been one of the core businesses that we've been doing in the European Union or the European communities, as they were called before. So the evolvement of human rights in Europe's recent history, for most of us, I think would sound like a very strange question, you know. But it's not exactly the case, to say the least. We have, for decades, many decades, we've lived by European values, but they were never really spelled out till very recently. For a long time, nobody really knew what they were, actually. There were no definitions around, not in the EU at least. And we make them explicit only now. And if you look at this recent post-war history, you could say that it has never been member states who take the initiative for most steps in European integration, but who put human rights on the agenda, but it was an organization outside the EU, the Council of Europe, together actually with the European Parliament, who forced together the issue on the agenda. And both organizations managed to do that, to get values and rule of law definitions into the EU via the back door, really. So let's go back in time a little bit and see how this happened, because it's an interesting history. So when the European Community was created in the early 1950s, it was not at all describing itself as a community of values, as we all think it was. No, it may have considered itself as such, but in the first European treaties, there was not a word about this. And very few people realized that when Spain and Portugal and Greece wanted membership in the 1960s, there was actually not a word in the treaty that said that they couldn't. So some member states even said, you know, why not? Even though Spain and Greece and Portugal were dictatorships at the time. But then luckily we had the Council of Europe. The Council of Europe was set up in 1948, just before the European communities. And its task was to protect citizens from abuses by its own state. The statute even says loud and clear that all member states should recognize human rights and fundamental freedoms. In 1950 already, the Council of Europe drafted the Convention on Human Rights, which mentioned human rights and also collective enforcement, because saying it is one thing, but also talking about enforcing it is much better. And on this basis, the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg was established. The EU, European communities at the time, were actually mostly focused on economic issues, rebuilding Europe's economy and so on. But something very interesting happened with those economic issues, that while human rights were considered the job of the Council of Europe, outside the EU framework, and also of national governments, of course, the first civil rights that actually appeared in EU texts were based on economic liberties. And this was because workers were crossing borders, companies were crossing borders, so there was a need for harmonization. And this all happened in the 1960s. It's a long story, but after a couple of high-level court cases van Gent en Loos, Costa versus NL in 1963 and 64, EU law could for the first time override national law, because national constitutions could not protect civil rights well enough. So there, via economic issues, the EU started to drift more into values and rights. Spain applied in 1961 under Franco. The Council of Europe actually had turned him down because there was no, in the 1950s, because there was no democratization process. But according to the European Treaty, as I said, anyone could become a member. Membership was just of the EU was just an economic issue. So France and actually also Germany said to Spain, well, why not? And then this caused a huge outcry in the Council of Europe and in the European Parliament, which had no powers at all at the time, and also in civil society. And to its credit, actually, the Netherlands was one of the member states that took it up. You know, for them, it went a bit too far as well. And together they made so much noise that the whole thing was discreetly put in a drawer. The whole issue of they never said no to Spain, but they just postponed it indefinitely. And Spain, in the end, only got a trade agreement, I believe. 2 years later, the same thing happened with Portugal, and in '67 with Greece, same story. At that time, the EU also became more strict to outside countries, like Turkey. And it started to connect. It started to connect development aid, the disbursement of development aid and access to the EU market to human rights. So they told third countries all over the world, no child labor, you need free elections, get your human rights in order, otherwise you won't get a cent. And slowly, slowly, this started with talk, and of course it ended up written down in some landmark agreements. There was the Lomé Agreement and later Cotonou. But of course, if you do that, people start saying like, hey, if you're so strict for third countries, then you should apply it to member states, and you should also apply it for European institutions too. Why shouldn't it apply to them? And one of the reflections of this zeitgeist, let's call it that way, is the Helsinki Final Act, of course, in 1975, with human rights guarantees for East and for West. There were also a lot of resolutions on human rights in the European Parliament in those days. In 1986, half of the constitutions of the member states still mentioned the death penalty as a possibility. It's not that long ago. And now it's illegal in the EU. So in this way, via market issues, via pressure from the European Parliament and the Council of Europe, via demands, our demands to third countries, human rights started to be spelled out in EU texts. There was a single act on the internal market. There was the Maastricht, the Treaty of Maastricht in the early 90s. And then came the Charter of Fundamental Rights that in the end, that ended up in the Lisbon Treaty in 2009. And this was really the first time, 2009, the first time it really appeared in the European Treaty. So that's only a short while ago. And by now we also have a so-called semester for human rights, like we have for national budgets in the European Union, where everybody can discuss each other's budgets, or now in this case, human rights. 10, 11 years, not more. And this, of course, brings us to some current developments in Europe. The discussions on human rights and the rule of law in Poland and Hungary. You see, through modern history, member states have always been very reluctant to hit each other on the head on human rights and the rule of law. Because simply, today maybe I condemn you, but tomorrow I need you on a different issue. So they are always very careful. They can be harsh sometimes and outspoken, but really enforcing all the rules that we have to the utmost, this is for most member states a step too far still, and I believe this will stay that way. So from this, you can deduct that the political process of putting pressure on member states on human rights and the rule of law only works up to a point. And this is also what we have seen when Commissioner Frans Timmermans went to Poland and Hungary all the time. There was a lot of pressure, but in the end, member states did not ask him and the European Commission to bite. So I think the political process has partly become a failure. Then there was the judiciary road, which functioned a little bit better. It's a common institution. It's not the West telling the East what to do, because this is how it's viewed sometimes. And also what the power of the court in a way is that if it condemns a country, it means that there's no legal certainty in that country. So investors will pull out, will pull out, or there's a danger of that. And at the same time, this is a big incentive for countries like Poland and also Hungary to obey and implement the verdict of the court. Then lastly, we have something new. That's the conditionality on European subsidies in the COVID fund of 750 billion euros. And again, it was not put in, the conditionality was not put there by the member states, but as always, it was put there by the European Parliament. They got all the texts about, where those funds could go, and they were appalled because there was nothing about the rule of law or human rights. So they wrote it into the text and said, otherwise we will vote down the whole European budget. In the end, member states weakened the language again. Otherwise, Hungary and Poland would have vetoed the whole thing. And this is, I guess, what we should take away from this whole story. This is how it goes. 2 steps forward and then 1 step back. It also implies that the story is not finished, far from it. With some member states or some politicians in member states talking about reinstating the death penalty sometimes, with some member states really clipping the wings of the press and the judiciary. There is a severe risk. There is erosion, and there is a severe risk of more erosion. And as we've seen, even if you have rules, and we have them by now, member states are always very reluctant to enforce them. So let me finish by saying it's an uphill battle, and I guess it will stay that way. Member states are not going to act, but public pressure definitely helps. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Caroline, for your keynote speech. It was really fascinating to hear a rather short history of human rights on the European agenda. I was quite surprised by it, actually. And I think it's also a very European story in the sense that it kind of the progression has been kind of erratic and kind of muddling along, which this is something which makes me think of Europe always. I have just one question, Caroline. Do you have a feeling that this muddling along that Europe has been doing for, well, I guess since it was, it started after the war, that might be the fundamentals of Europe, and that it might be the identity of Europe, and that it might never change?
I think this is a very that's very well put, because it always goes like this. It goes like this in when we discuss the euro, whether it's European defense or digitalization policy, whatever, the subjects you like and the subjects you hate. It all goes very slowly, always, because this is how the EU functions. There are 27 member states right now, and they all have different hang-ups and different interests and different traditions and history. So one goes in this direction and the other goes there, and the third one yet in another. And to keep everybody sort of on board, they all need to get something, because if there's nothing in it for them, then they will turn their back on it and start sabotaging, which is not what we want. So this is why it always goes extremely slow, and we usually need a few crises as well, which now with human rights is the same story. The situation in some member states is just forcing this on the agenda. So then we move, but reluctantly and with great difficulty. But this is normal.
Thanks a lot, Caroline. And yeah, maybe that's not even such a bad thing to muddle along. Maybe it will prevent radical changes for the worst. Again, thanks a lot for your keynote speech. There is ample opportunity for the audience to ask questions to Caroline. We'll be doing that at the end of this event, but feel free to put some questions in the chat already, or try to remember them for the end of the event. And that also counts for the other speakers as well, if you have questions for them. Speaking of which, we'll be switching to our next speaker, Kirsten Meerschaert, next to me, and before you'll be saying a bit, we'll be looking at one of the videos that's part of your campaign. This is a video entry from the Netherlands about a quite controversial digital surveillance system. So I propose we have a look at the video first.
De mensen waren gewoon bang. Ze waren zo bang dat ze de deurbel waarschijnlijk niet eens meer durfden de deuren open te doen. En toen ben ik gaan vechten voor ze.
Hier wordt een mensenrecht geschonden. Dat je ervoor kiest om het in te zetten in de wijken van de minder bedeelden en niet in Wassenaar. Waar ben je nou mee bezig? Wat voor kloof in de samenleving ben je hier nou mee teweeg aan het brengen?
Als je het zou vergelijken met een actie in de analoge wereld, dan zou je kunnen spreken van een klopjacht van een enorm team van sociaal rechercheurs die in een wijk alle huizen binnentreden zonder toestemming en alles doorzoeken naar mogelijke tekenen van fraude.
Ik had zelf het gevoel, vanuit mijn rechtvaardigheidsgevoel, het kan niet anders dan dat we gelijk krijgen. Maar de advocaten, die wisten natuurlijk zelf waar hun eigen zwakke punten zaten.
We zaten met z'n allen in de rechtszaal en toen werd het vonnis voorgelezen.
Toen opeens kantelde dat.
En punt na punt kregen we gelijk.
Wij keken opzij en je zag heel voorzichtig die mondhoeken omhoog gaan. En op een gegeven moment dat het echt klaar was toen en de rechters verdwenen waren, toen ontplofte die hele zaal.
Het was gewoon van, klaar, het mag niet meer.
Maak me daar geen enkele illusie over. We gaan andere vormen op zien poppen.
Ik ben geen voorstander van fraude of dat soort dingen. Daar ben ik ook zeer op tegen. Maar niet op de manier zoals ze het wilden doen.
So this was one of the campaign videos, but maybe Kirsten, you can elaborate more about the general goal of this campaign.
Sure, with pleasure. So as we've already discussed today, and I think as the Mentimeter results showed, human rights is a very vague concept. Some of the words that came up are in and of themselves vague. Peace, justice, fundament. Those might have different meanings for different people. So what we wanted to do with this Bring Human Rights Home campaign was to point to the fact that human rights belong to everybody. They can equally be denied to everybody. But in the hopeful aspect of life, we can all stand up to make sure that our human rights are defended. There is a misunderstanding, I think, partly because there is provocative miscommunication about what rights entail and to whom they apply and in which circumstances. And I think that people generally are more attuned to what they're not allowed to do than what they are legally entitled to do. So they might know that they can't break certain laws, they can't exceed the speed limit on a highway, but they might not know to the full extent to which their rights are guaranteed. Caroline mentioned the EU and the Council of Europe legal framework, the laws and the international agreements that give us this framework to embrace our rights. But she also mentioned that they come without legal certainty. There's a big difference between what is written on paper, no matter how many decades it indeed took to get there, and then the manifestation of what is on paper. And we see that, as Pepijn also noted, in the past years, there's just been an increasingly worrying trend experienced perhaps 10, 20 years ago, further afield, but now closer and closer to home, where people, governments, those who wish to be in positions of power, are increasingly questioning the universality of human rights. So that's what we wanted to address with this campaign. We wanted to showcase that rights are not a vague, nebulous term, but they have real meaning in our daily lives and to individuals on a daily basis.
Thanks, Kirsten. I'd like to react to that, but before I do that, I'd like to return to the audience and ask for your input. And we're returning back to the Mentimeter again. And this time, I'd like to know from the audience if you consider, what do you consider the most important human right? If that's correct. I'm just seeing a different question here. But that's the question I'd like to hear from you. While the audience is filling in the question, I'd like to come back to something you mentioned, Kirsten. If we zoom out, not just Europe, if we zoom out to the whole world, there is this worrying trend of more authoritative regimes. Whether you look at the Philippines or India or Brazil, it looks like it's on the rise. Do you have the feeling that this campaign might help, change direction of this worrying trend?
Of course, that's a hope. Of course, we want to, by sharing these stories, show that this is part of humanity's good, that we all need to engage on these issues. But when you speak to these crises that have taken place around the world, I take solace and I find hope in the manifestations of protest that have gone hand in hand with those crises. The fact that even in the throes of the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw people taking a variety of fora, quite innovative ones, so not necessarily mobilizing in the streets, but hanging up flags in their windows or via virtues like this, platforms like this, Zoom, to make sure that their voices were heard when it comes to respecting the human rights and the rule of law. So as Caroline once again mentioned, there are moments of crises where perhaps from a legal framework perspective or from a government or regional organization perspective, such as the EU or the Council of Europe, we see that for every step forward, we take a couple steps back or vice versa. But I think, again, if we come back to the people are there to have their voices heard, to reclaim their rights. And I think that that's the hope I see for the future.
Thank you, Kirsten. We'll definitely be listening to the voice of one of these people who are also trying to to change the direction from Ukraine. But for now, I'd like to return to the Mentimeter. If I can have a look at the results, I found my glasses as well, so I can actually have a look at all of the results. Oh, that is okay. I already have a summary there. I see the most important rights are equality, non-discrimination, freedom of thought, and the right to life. Oh, even more, human dignity and safety. Well, that pretty much sums up all of the human rights. Can I see what is voted on more or something, or this is just all the things that are mentioned? Well, excellent. It's a very informed audience, that's for sure. Okay, I'd like to move on to my next guest, who is, I hopefully pronounced correctly, Tetiana Pechonchik. Do I pronounce your name correctly?
Yes.
Excellent. Well, I'd like to say hello, Ukraine. It's a little bit like
Hello. Hello,
I
Netherlands.
watched all Eurovision, so that's why I just like to say hello, Ukraine. Also, my children are really dancing on this song every evening after dinner. They dance to the European song, the Ukrainian song. So, excellent. Miss Pechonchik, let me say Tetiana. She works for ZMINA, which is a Ukraine-based NGO which promotes the rule of law, ideas of civil society, and human rights in Ukraine. We'll talk a little bit more in depth later, but first I'd like us to see a video entry from Ukraine. So let's have a look.
Важко морально сприйняти того, що ти кожен подих твій розумієш, що кожен подих це ти отруюєшся. І ми дуже багато хворіємо. Бували періоди, коли взагалі нема де заховатись. Ні вночі ти не відкриєш ні квартирку, хоч воно все одно просачується в щілинки в вікнах, ні вдень. І це ж не просто задихаєшся від цієї воні, це ж отрута. Коли ми вийшли, ми вже коли стали під свинокомплексом, то ми простояли 8 місяців. Ми розбивалися і вночі чергували, і вдень чергували. У нас була вимога не закриття, а приведення свинокомплексу до норм.
Коли я долучилася до справи, то жителі вже зробили дуже багато. Вони позбирали і певні документи, вони організували людей, що було найважливіше. Ми їм допомогли якби направити в правильне юридичне русло цю свою кампанію.
Били наших чоловіків і жінок били, ламають руки, б'ють ногами.
Ви представляєте, як це було 19 тисяч населення в цьому селищі. У нас навіть
Так, був такий позов, який насправді дуже налякав активістів, тому що цей позов був поданий для того, щоб люди перестали боротися проти свиноферми. Ферма не функціонує, люди мають чим дихати, в них є чисте довкілля.
Це наша земля. І чому нам кудись виїжджати, десь шукати інше місце, коли в нас ось такий чудовий край, яка чудова земля.
So, Tetiana, maybe you can elaborate a little bit about the action of these brave people in Ukraine.
Yes, thank you very much, and hello to everyone from Kiev. Zmina is very glad to be a part of this campaign, and we are very proud to present this video from Ukraine. This is about environmental issues which are now very actual and important for Ukraine. Our organization monitors attacks on human rights defenders in Ukraine, and people who protect environment activists. They are one of three groups who are suffering from different types of attacks. And we see this story from the villagers who arrange a campaign together with human rights lawyers. They were able to protect their rights and stop this farm's activity. And I myself also from the small village originally, and I know and I understand how difficult it is to build up a campaign at the very local level. And our organization also prepares different human rights related research and opinion poll. And of course, we have every 2 years this opinion poll of how Ukrainians understand human rights. And as in many countries, people think about human rights as a very vague concept. They support human rights as everything good against everything bad, but very often they do not know what human rights is and how to protect their rights. And also we measure the level of activity, how people protect their rights if they were violated. And here we see a progress because, for example, when we started these surveys 4 years ago, there were only 40% of people who tried to protect their rights when they were violated. And as for now, our last research in the end of 2020 showed it is 60% of people, so 20% growth, which is for us is very positive because it was a year of COVID quarantine, and we thought that the result will be negative. But this is inspiring us that more and more people are trying to defend their rights. But the negative point is that only 1/3 among those people who were trying to protect their rights, they achieved success, while 2/3 they said that they tried, but nothing changed. In this video, we see the positive, inspiring example, and we think it's very important working as human rights defenders to show these positive stories that it is feasible and people can protect their rights if they plan a campaign, if they if they are united, and also working together with human rights lawyers. And I'm very glad to see in this video my colleague Olga Meleny, environmental human rights defenders. And also what is also important for Ukraine is that in Ukraine, people believe in the power of media. When we asked them what is the best way to protect your rights, what is the most efficient tool, and we gave them like 30 different variants. They put the media on the first place, which means from one side that people in Ukraine maybe they do not trust like traditional bodies like police or courts or local self-government bodies, etc., etc. But we still have to some extent the power of press and free media and competition, and people believe that making their story vocal, loud to the media and to the bigger audience, they can achieve success in Ukraine. And also what is important, I already saw all 8 videos from different countries. I think almost any of these stories can happen in Ukraine. They are universal, I think, these stories, and they are appealing to different audiences, to different people. And Zmina will be happy to show all this video on our pages, and we think it will be interesting for our audience. We built up our audience using also this very important communication tool to say stories via media, via video stories, etc. And we hope that more and more supporters will join our activity, and the people will be more and more active in trying to defend their rights.
Tatiana, thank you for your positive story, and it really got me thinking. I'm just curious about the villagers who protested against the pig farm. Do you think they have become more politically active since they protested against this pig farm? I'm asking this because I have a friend in Moscow who was not politically interested at all, and then she started to initialize a recycling program of garbage, and she had a lot of resistance with the local government, and from that point on she got politically active. So could you say that these like concrete actions like the protest against the pig farm, it can be like a catalyst for more broad political awareness?
Yes, and what is important to know about this story from Biliki village, from Poltava region, is that this struggle of the local villagers lasted for many years, and people used different instruments. They arranged peaceful demonstrations against this farm. They invited media to show this, to broadcast this story. They also went to court, and the owner of this farm also prepared a lawsuit against villagers. So they were also attacked physically. So it was a long story, which finally, and people were terrified. They were scared by all of these instruments that were used against them. But finally they won, and this story also activated people in Ukraine. By the way, now we have a very important reform of decentralization, where a lot of responsibilities and also budgets go to the local level, and people decide by themselves how to arrange, how to organize different processes. And also they have responsibility. And we see the activization of the local people through this, because if they know, for example, that everything is decided in the capital by some people they cannot reach, this is one story. But if people know that the decisions are taken by their local deputies, by their local self-government, and the money are there, they start to demand answers from them, and they try to influence this policy on the local level. And this is this activization of the local community in different small cities and villages in Ukraine. But from the other side, we see a negative trend in response, a growing number of attacks on local activists. And no one would attack someone who is not important, who cannot, like, this also means for us that people on the local level, local activists are becoming more and more powerful. And we hope that one day we will be able, we will build a country with effective law enforcement bodies that can investigate all these cases, and people can conduct their local activism without any fear and be in safety.
Great. Tatiana, I really hope that Ukrainian people will stay active, both politically, and it's a great idea to to make them responsible as well for the local budgets. That it doesn't just disappear in some official's pocket. So it's really inspiring. I'd like to thank you, Tatiana. Again, if the audience has any questions, in this case to Tatiana, please put them in the chat and we'll get back to that later. For now, we're moving on to our next speaker from Hungary, to be exactly from the Hungarian Helsinki Committee, Aniko Bakonyi. How do I pronounce your last name?
You did it just fine. Thanks.
Yeah,
Hello.
Okay. Hi. Good to see you, Aniko. Before we hear from you, again, we'd first like to have a look at the video, in this case, from Hungary. Let's have a look.
Egy érezhető feszültség volt egyébként, és ugye akkor érkeztek, és egy teljesen szervezetten skandálva, hogy visszajöttünk, stb. Tehát
együtt skandálva, hogy cigánybűnözők meg fogtok dögleni. És akik ott álltak a bátyám háza előtt sorfalat rendőrök, azoktól megkérdeztem, hogy ezektől meg fogtok tudni védeni minket? És az egyik rendőr azt mondta, hát nem Isten bíz. Na, hogy akkor egy kicsit megijedtem. És elkezdtek dobálózni vizes palackokkal, betondarabokkal, kövekkel, kavicsokkal, amit értek. Ez olyan volt, mintha szóltam a rendőröknek, azt mondták, hogy jó, majd jövünk vissza. Semmit nem csináltak, elmentek.
akkor tudtam azt, hogy itt kevés lesz a beszéd, vagy az, hogy valami ellendemonstrációt csinálunk.
Meg az, hogy Magyarországon ilyen többet ne forduljon elő.
A magyar igazságszolgáltatás jóváhagyta ezt a rendőrségi álláspontot, hogy itt, ami valójában volt, hogy itt rendben voltak a dolgok is. ...2017. januárjában mondta ki a Strasbourgi Bíróság azt, hogy hibázott a magyar állam, amikor nem védte meg az állampolgárait az erőszakkal szemben. Két érintett ember is, az ő társaik, meg a családjuk, meg a közösségük is megmutatta azt, hogy megéri bátornak lenni. És még az is egyébként egy nagyon nagy eredménye és fejleménye az ügynek, hogy most a Norbival, illetve a Zajkai cigány önkormányzata van egy közös projektünk, és együtt dolgozunk a gyűlöletbűncselekmények kezelésén. Szerintem ez egy ilyen csodálatos eredmény. Miért nem?
Hát hogyne, ez is.
Ezt sose gondoltuk.
So yeah, this is yet another example of the campaign to become more aware of human rights. In this case, about the discrimination of Roma, which is of course not a uniquely Hungarian affair. Aniko, I'd like you to elaborate a little bit on the video that we just saw.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity. First of all, I would just like to say a couple of thoughts about the three videos, because I think it's quite striking how these various stories connect across the different contexts. Because we've seen always the fight against the misuse or abuse of power and authority. There has been a significant power imbalance between those who fight for their justice and from whom they have to gather this. And then the third thing I would like to stress is that how much the people who suffer the injustice, their aim is the recognition of this fact that they suffer the injustice. And basically, they want those who did this to recognize it, to take responsibility for it. So in other words, accountability. And then I've seen this in all the stories, and I've, similarly to Tatiana, I also watched the other videos, and these seem to be overarching elements. And I think that's important to note. Now, in the Hungarian story, I want to start with what my colleague, the attorney of the Hungarian Helsinki Committee, said, that it shows that it's worthwhile being brave in Hungary and everywhere and standing up for your rights. And what I especially like in this video, the way in which the Roma community is portrayed. So they are portrayed as seeking justice and not as victims of the neo-Nazi attack or the police who actually failed to protect them and who failed to protect the community, but they are portrayed as active citizens who want to defend themselves, who ask for help, who are willing to go to court, who are even willing to shoulder the loss in Hungary and then the legal fees associated with it. So if you if you remember, this was in 2012, and it took them 5 years actually to win at the European Court of Human Rights. And they also said when they were interviewed that they had to fundraise for the legal fees in Hungary. And then they fundraised for it for 1 day. And that showed them that they have support and that this gave them power and the strength to go on. And so the money they received as a result, 5 years later, they also used it for the community, which I think is quite a nice gesture. So there are several ways of reading this story. I like to read it as, you know, how resistance against human rights violation can be empowering. And then you can see it at the end when they are talking about how the fate of the 2 men evolved. Norby is active, one of them that my colleague talks to at the very end. He is now head of the Roma municipality in their town called Ajka. And he represents his community. Its members turn to him for advice and for assistance. He appears on media. He's a kind of public figure. And he goes out of his way, and then he's active in also protecting his own community and takes part in the fight against hate crime. They take part in a multidisciplinary cooperation with the Roma municipality, an LGBT organization, and an umbrella organization of human rights defenders. So I think this is quite a journey also for him from that incident in 2012. So why is this story so special? Why did we decide that this would be good to be filmed? I think for that it's interesting to look a little bit at the Hungarian local context, and then I'm not gonna take it very widely. I just want to look at the context from the point of view of the widespread popular narrative of human rights right now, the expressions of solidarity, and the level of involvement and activism from the part of its citizens. So currently in Hungary, human rights and those who defend them are tagged in the name of a nationalistic authoritarian ideology that considers human rights a Western European creation, something that is alien to the prevailing governmental narrative in Hungary. We at the Hungarian Helsinki Committee, on the other hand, think that human rights is not a Western contract, but it's rather universal and inherent to all of us, independent of the country we live in. So we are taking a more universalistic approach to human rights. And because of this very strong governmental narrative currently, we think that our job, beyond our classical call as human rights defenders, is also to show a counter narrative of human rights, to frame human rights in a different way. So how is that? That we need to portray that human rights is for all. We need to illustrate its importance in everyone's life. And we need to show that defending human rights is not just a job. This is something that everyone can do. And there are various ways for standing up for your rights. And then you can take not just legal avenues. There can be very small steps of speaking up for someone else when that person suffers an unjust remark, let's say at the bus. That is already, defending that other person and his or her right. And to show that these small steps can actually lead to change. In a repressive regime that Hungary is unfortunately turning into, citizens are made to feel that there is nothing they can do. But at the same time, a well-functioning democracy relies on its citizens, on their active participation. So we think that this active citizenship needs to be awakened in order to protect human rights. Hungary is often described by the lack of activism, by the presence of apathy, and the absence of solidarity. But there are inspiring and hopeful stories as well. And if we just look back at our recent history with the current pandemic, we can see several examples of solidarity and activism just for the past year. So there were people shopping for their elderly neighbors and several other acts of solidarity we could express, how children were assisted with computers, let's say, to be able to take part in remote learning. And we at the Hungarian Helsinki Committee also followed suit, and we thought that it was also our job to go out of our own way and to go beyond our usual mandate. And we were also engaged in these extra acts that to support, let's say, health worker or the children who lacked computers. So why are these stories important, and why is it important to share these stories? I think this campaign is great because it shows a human rights narrative that can be appealing to many people through the positive examples. And actually what we want is, we want these stories to come close to people, to show, for example, with the Hungarian story, that although this particular story is about the Roma community being let down by the police, failing to protect them, but this can happen to other people as well. So, and maybe if people see that these particular people decided not to let this happen, it can inspire others, and others can draw strength from Norby and Johnny, who didn't give up. It took them 5 years, but they went along. So if there are many if there are many such small acts of everyday activism, you can call it everyday heroism as well, then from these small puzzle pieces, we can hopefully build a more open and inclusive society where citizens stand up, see how human rights and its protection is theirs as well, where human rights belong to everyone and anyone, and where we all see its value, and therefore we are all ready to protect them. So this is our hope, and this is what we are going to be working for.
Great. So thank you for explaining also the power of a good narrative, the power of good storytelling. I think that is really at the core of all of the campaign videos, and about making small steps and to speak up. That already makes a big difference. And I'd like to go a bit more in depth about something you mentioned. You mentioned about the people that actually don't speak up and don't make small steps. And this is something I've been struggling with living in Russia, that there's a big group of people who are quite, I would say, apathetic towards injustice, of even things that matter to themselves. But I have the feeling that these apathetic people, it's not that they don't care, it's more that they just don't really know how to express themselves or how to change the situation. Do you agree with that, or do you think apathetic people, it's just don't care at all?
Sorry, I didn't get the last part. Do I think that apathetic people?
If people are apathetic, does it mean that they just don't care about that situation, or that they don't really know how to change?
I think everyone cares in different ways. So I don't think that there are people who don't care. It's just, I think there are various ways to awaken people's desire to be active and to do something. And also, if you show others doing it, I think the context is very important. I think it's much more difficult to show support when that's not the general climate around you. I think, people like to follow their peers and then the usual patterns of behavior around them. So in a repressive regime, standing up is a revolutionary act, and then it might have a high consequence. And we are different in our readiness to shoulder this. But I think if you are asking people to make small steps, something that they can easily offer, something that they can easily give, then that's an ask that many people can do. And I think, and many probably would do. I think it's just the right way of finding this the right thing to ask in various contexts. And I think that there is no such thing that everyone's apathetic and then no one wants to do anything, because there are things that people are doing and are willing to do. It's just how you go there and how you find that that little entry. I think that's probably like a big mission or a big call. We can't hear you. I'm sorry.
And other people hear me? Can hear me? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Just, yeah, you can hear me now? Excellent. My question was, let me just repeat my question. I'd like to turn this around because I know your work it's probably it's not easy to do your work in Hungary. Did you ever think about just quitting all your work and doing something that is a bit less dangerous, or you think, okay, it's not worth it, I'm quitting?
Well, first of all, I would say that this is not dangerous. I would say, like, maybe if you let's say go out protesting in Russia or in Turkey, I think that's probably a different level. But it's not dangerous. It can be inconvenient, and then it's quite a hostile. It can be quite a hostile climate in Hungary, but I wouldn't say it's dangerous. I wouldn't use that word. And then I hope that it's not going to come to that point also. And yeah, everyone has, like ups and downs, but I never thought of doing anything different, to be honest. So you can have bad days, but next day you wake up and you start differently.
Let's hope it stays that way. I'm turning back. Thank you a lot, Aniko, and we'll get back to you definitely when there's the Q&A of the audience. I'm turning back to the audience, and we're turning back to the Menti screen because I'd like to hear a bit more from the audience. The first question I'd like you to answer is, do you feel you can protect your rights? It's a poll, so you can either fill in yes, no, or maybe you don't know. It's possible. It's already being filled in real time. That is really nice. And actually, we might get the result right now. As of now, nobody says no. So everybody either feel they can protect their rights or they don't know, which is also a small portion. So that's a good sign. And let's move on to the next question, which is an open question. And that is, how would you define a human rights defender? And I'll give this question a bit more time because it's a bit more difficult to answer. And in the meantime, I'd like to take some questions from the audience. We gathered some of the questions that have been posted on the chat, and you're still, it's perfectly possible still to put a question in the chat. And let me just put on my glasses. Oh no, the font's getting bigger. Excellent. And the first question, I guess, is to all the speakers, either here in the studio or online. It's from an anonymous person from the audience, and that is, it's quite a long question, so pay attention. Do you think Europe should change its attitude towards those incidents? I mean, and I hope I will understand what these incidents are. I'm just going to continue the question. Maybe we'll find out. I mean, other than announcing that EU is concerned by the incident, yeah, EU does that a lot actually. Yeah, last week with the Belarus airplane incident, they were also very concerned because it kind of became something to make fun about. There's even a Twitter page about it. I guess whenever something bad happens, we expect the EU to do more. This might actually be a good question for the keynote speaker, Caroline de Gruyter. It's an often heard complaint about Europe. I guess it also has to do with the fact that Europe is modeling along also in the foreign policy. Do you think Europe is actually, it will be possible for Europe to speak in one voice at some point and in a strong voice, Caroline?
Honestly, no. But don't despair too much. No. I mean, the European Union is owned by and governed by the member states to a very large extent. And even some areas that were not so intergovernmental, where the Commission could speak for the member states to a large extent. I'm thinking of trade, for instance, where we are really strong as EU. Even that is slowly being renationalized. You know, there are national referendums or even regional referendums on an agreement with Ukraine or with Canada and so on. So I think the trend is more towards nationalization than towards a more, common way of reacting to all kinds of things that happen around us or are sometimes thrown at us. And especially foreign policy is, there is no European foreign policy. It's only national foreign policies, and every member state is defending its own interests. And they all have their own priorities. I mean, the Baltics have a different priority than a country like Portugal, which, when you look at it, is also understandable. So I think they always need, I think the EU can react to things coming from outside or from inside, but it always takes time. It is easy to voice for our common European foreign minister. Nobody can even call him like that, but Josep Borrell, it's easy to say like, I am concerned. But even when he does that, this statement has to go to all the 27 capitals, and they all have to sign off on this, So it takes time. What strikes me in that in a couple of incidents, and I also think that this question refers to the hijack of the Ryanair plane from one EU an EU airline flying from one EU capital to another. The reaction was rather swift this time. And apparently we were lucky because the heads of state and government of all the 27 countries, they had just planned a summit meeting for the next day. So that probably helped them, but they spoke about it for maybe an hour and not more. So this is actually, it was so blatant, of course. And of course, they asked the Commission, they asked Josep Borrell to draw up lists of possible sanctions, and you have to really be very specific. So in a way, they were kicking the can down the road, but you've got to, you really have to. I'd rather they take a couple of more days in targeting the right persons or the right companies or the right institutions in Belarus than that they just hastily start smashing some furniture around, which is not the way of the European way of doing things.
Well, let's hope that the reaction of the EU Ryanair incident is maybe a trend. Maybe they will be more swift. Maybe it was an exception. Who knows?
I think we will get more surprises of this kind in the future. I mean, this is.
Yeah.
I think it's on the increase rather than on the decrease. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. Let's return to the question I posed to the audience. Let's return to the Mentimeter screen. How would you define a human rights defender? Just read some of the answers. Someone who stands up for their rights, for the right of others. A person who protects only human rights on behalf of other people. Courage, or a courageous person, definitely. I think that's maybe something necessary to be a human rights defender. Brave and principled, same story. And someone mentioned everyone can defend human rights, definitely. And it's something really important to realize. And hopefully this campaign will help for this realization. Let me pose a last question to the audience. We'll move on. It's a poll again. After hearing all these stories, do you think you can be a human rights defender? Again, it's a poll. And don't be ashamed to put no. Really, it's totally fine. It even makes a poll interesting. I don't want to have it look like a Lukashenko election results. So definitely be honest with your answer. And in the meantime, we'll get back to the poll later. In the meantime, I'd like to take another question from the audience. So another question to Caroline. Maybe we'll see. Can we see if there's another question to someone else from the? This is a question to Kirsten from Susanna Suhl. Can the right for fair trials be considered as a basic human right? Is the independence of judges sufficient to secure high quality of judgments?
Those are two quite loaded questions. I may. The first one to me is a bit more straightforward. I'm not sure. There's no such thing as a basic human right, but the international agreements that were referenced earlier in the discussions do make reference to the right to a fair trial. There's a right to defend yourself. There's also a protection against libelous claims being prosecuted for, on the basis of trumped up charges, for example. So to me, it is one of the fundamental, if we can slightly shift the wording there, it is absolutely part and parcel of the human rights package, if you will. On the second point, and I'm sorry, I've lost it. If we could get back to it. Yes, on whether the independence of judges is sufficient. No, it is a foundational principle that your judges be independent, but they are just one moving elements within a rule of law framework. You have all of the other factors. You have the prosecutorial office. You have the question as to the ability of lawyers to properly defend their clients, whether their clients are on the side of the defense or on the side of the prosecution. So judicial independence is coming very much to the fore, and in particular in the discussions we've had earlier today about Poland and Hungary. But that's one flashpoint of a more systemic problem in the backsliding of rule of law in these countries.
Not only a problem for those two countries, but for maybe Europe as a whole.
Absolutely.
Or the world.
For the world, we see this even in international courts, that the question of independence of judges is also being addressed.
Yeah. Excellent question. Let's take another one. I'm looking at the screen, so sometimes it takes a little bit of time. This question is a question to Pepijn. The two examples from Rotterdam and Ukraine, the videos we just saw, shows that entrepreneurs, governments, and courts not really know what are the human rights and how to maintain them. Are you working on clear instructions and trainings to bring human rights and animal and environmental rights under their attention?
I think it's a bit more.
It goes on. Okay, let me see. This is more something opinion added. I'm afraid most rights stand too far from society.
Yeah, interesting question. Are we working on making rights more known? I'll take that part of the question first, perhaps. Yes, we are, and I think there is a need for that as well. In general, we work with institutions across Europe in training programs to really, well, perhaps not teach human rights, but to discuss human rights and how they can be applied in various ways. And in doing so, obviously, we relate to a number of human rights frameworks which are to our disposal within the European Union, within the Council of Europe, or elsewhere. So the focus on training or debating those rights is definitely there. And the fact here, the environmental rights and animal rights are also mentioned. We see this as sort of a new layer of rights which is now coming into being and which becomes more and more important.
Such as the court ruling against Shell, for instance.
Absolutely, or the court ruling here in the Netherlands on the Urgenda case, which was followed again in France and in Germany to a certain extent. So we see more and more that, at least here in the Netherlands, I think the judges are testing and checking the rights of citizens vis-a-vis the treaties which are there in place, and to what extent governments, or for that matter in the Shell case, also companies are responding to that. Yeah.
There was another excellent question. Let's take one more. Let's return to the question 2 to Caroline. It's from Pieter Klerk. And the question goes as follows. You didn't mention that all EU states were bound to respect human rights as parties to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the different UN treaties next to the Council of Europe instruments. When did EU instruments add something to those treaties, such as the death penalty? And when did Brussels get something to say about it? Still not much, it seems to me, when we make a distinction between human rights and rule of law. The two are closely related, of course, but I would argue that, that it is the rule of law where Brussels has something to say. A story of 2 steps forward and 1 step backward, as you said. And that it is not, or hardly, the case on human rights. Caroline, I hope you can follow this question. It's a bit of a complex question. Did you kind of get the gist?
Yeah, I get the gist. Of course, he is right. But what you see through modern European post-war history is that it hasn't always been the rule of law that we have been most concerned about. For a long time, it was more economic rights within the European communities. So it comes and it goes, and now it is, and of course there's international law, but international law it's very difficult to enforce. But now the focus is much more on rule of law issues, and I would argue that Brussels doesn't really have much power, again, because as I mentioned, the whole political process of negotiating with Poland, and Hungary was a little bit of a different story, I think, has just not gotten anywhere because it became too political, and in a way the Commission fell flat on its nose. Was not the Commission could only proceed if member states would have let her proceed against Poland, and they didn't want to do that. So in the end, it is still the member states who have most power over these issues, and this is exactly what makes it so difficult.
Right. Maybe it's time to return to the poll we started on Menti. Should be results now. The question was, I'd like to see the screen again. Question was, after hearing all these stories, do you think you can be a human rights defender? 55% think so, 9% say no, and some about a third is still doubting. Maybe with a couple of more questions, we can convince them to do become a human rights defender. And I think it's like Anniko says, it starts with small steps. You're already a human rights defender if you walk on the street and see something that's happening that's not quite right, and you say something about it. It starts with small steps. So that's really something to keep in mind, I guess. All right, I'll take the next question. Maybe this one is to the three panelists. What would be your best piece of advice for someone starting out in the field of human rights? If you really have to think of, one good advice, I guess there's a lot of advice, but let's start with you, Kirsten. What would you advise?
I'm going to plug our campaign slogan here.
All right, go ahead.
Hashtag bring human rights home. You have to start out small. It's been said numerous times, but I think you have to start out locally. Start in your immediate neighborhood. Start with your neighbors, your friends, your family, your communities. Human rights are unfortunately being violated in those localities as well. We don't need to look at the larger world stage and the incredibly unfortunate infringements of the rule of law, as we've discussed about the situation in Belarus, to say that we can't be active when it comes to human rights. So start small, start local, and be engaged in your communities. As you said, that's where you will witness the needs of the people around you. And maybe it's not that you're going to stop some sort of violent crime from being committed, but just showing that you're there, that you care, and giving that touch of solidarity. I think that that's a great first step on your way to defending human rights.
And automatically, probably, these are issues that concern you because they're local issues, and about these issues, the underlying problems maybe better.
Absolutely. And again, I think this is what we were trying to do with this campaign and with telling these stories, is to make them also relatable. I think when you watch the individual experiences of the people depicted in the videos, whether it's the individuals whose rights were infringed or those who stood up to defend them, that you can see that these are unfortunately things that can happen to any one of us. One of us could walk out of the studio today and have one of these experiences as well. And as long as we keep that in mind, but also recognize the power within, we aren't helpless. We can raise our voices. We can defend ourselves and others. Then I think, again, there's hope.
Start local. Tatiana, do you have anything to add? What kind of advice would you give to a person who wants to start, being more politically active?
Yes, of course, there are many things that the person can do. I would say the easiest is to make a post on your Twitter account or Facebook about some human rights problem. Raising awareness is already a big thing. Then next step, to submit a letter of concern or petition to those who have power to decide to solve this problem, address to authorities. Then one can arrange a demonstration to bring more attention to the issue. Then to become a volunteer of the human rights organization and try to do something inside the team that is already working with the issue. To go to the human rights education program, there are many different programs that are run by human rights organizations. Usually it's informal education. And for example, our organization in Ukraine does a lot of human rights related trainings, especially for journalists, because in Ukraine, as I mentioned, there is people believe in the efficiency of media in protection of their rights. So it's just the 5 first steps. Of course, there could be more, and I'm sure that my colleagues can add more to this.
Excellent. That really is getting to start like a crash course into you being a human rights defender. Anniko, you have anything to add?
Yeah, maybe. I'll try. So I would say start something that you care about and that you know about, something that's really close to you. Like as Kerstin said, start really locally, even, in your family, among your friends. If there is an issue that you deeply care about, then start with that. And I think even, like if you just do as much as not remain silent when you see that something is not according to the way you think it should be, then I think is already helpful. If you, let's say, if you are a student, then you talk to your fellow students. If you are a parent, then you talk to the fellow parents about something that you don't agree with, and you dare to stand up and represent it and be the voice there. I think that is already the first step. And then you can follow Tatjana's, way, like learn more about it and then, join someone who's already doing it. But I think if you just do this on an everyday basis in your own circles, in the issues that you meet, I think then we are already more ahead.
Speak up about something you care about. I also try to do this. I also think sometimes it's a bit scary to, confront friends with something you don't agree with, but I guess that's what friendship is for. Let's move on to another question from the audience. We still have time. This is another question to the entire panel, and to Pepijn as well, of course. A question about the credibility of the human rights endeavor. Okay, this is something really concrete. Do we have to boycott the FIFA World Championship in Qatar in order to retain credibility? Maybe we just, there is more here, but let's just focus on this issue for now. Obviously, Qatar has problems with a lot of human rights infringements. At the same time, there is a world championship there, and that causes a lot of friction for trainers and football players and some people in the audience as well. Does one of you have an opinion about this? Pepijn, maybe you can start.
Sure. Yeah, I think I have an opinion on that. I think granting the World Championship to Qatar in the first place was a problem. And there have been a number of organizations that from the very start have made noise about that. But the noise hasn't been that hard as in, I would say, the last 2-3 years, when especially the casualties around the building the stadiums came forward, right? So I think now that it is coming near, we're almost there. It's inevitable that it will happen. I think it's late to back off. I would rather advise 2 things. I would think, first of all, for the current World Championship, we should go there. But we should be very vocal about it, and we should ask people to be very vocal about it. Also, the supporters themselves, I think there is some conscience about it. They should be vocal and should not be scared to be vocal. They have
becoming
the power.
more vocal, I have the idea.
Absolutely, absolutely.
More engaged.
But let's see how they react while they're there, because that is important as well, I think. And they should be given a stage to. And the second point is, we should engage with FIFA and other sports associations worldwide, to the point that, well, obviously sports and politics are different issues, but they're not completely separated. And I think FIFA is about to just see a bit of that. So we perhaps should engage with them and try to really change that. Not while it is on, but in the first stage, while making the selection. And also for the organization to become far more transparent. We've seen gross violations there within FIFA, which need to be addressed.
So now it's actually a little bit too late to have this discussion, but do it before, you know, they appoint a country. Kirsten, you have anything to add?
I would like to highlight the role and the platform and microphone, if you will, that individual athletes do have. I mean, you referenced it a bit, Pepijn, but we've seen in numerous countries around the world where individual athletes have stood up for the rights that they firmly believe in and the impact that has had. Now, in the case of the United States, for example, with football players who decided to take a knee, as it were, to protest against racial discrimination and violence in the United States, it took a long time before they were not vilified for doing so. But you're seeing more and more that the American football players and athletes from a variety of sports around the world are standing up and using the platform that they have, using this stage to share their beliefs about the validity. Indeed, absolutely. And I think there's backlash with some individuals saying, stay in your lane, you know, keep politics out of sports. But human rights are not political. Human rights apply to everybody and in all circumstances. And if you have that stage where you can reach millions of people, you must use it for good, not evil, if I may.
Yeah, it's a really interesting trend in the US, but in Holland as well. That soccer players are speaking up. One of the people online, would they like to add something? Maybe the mics are not on and I cannot really see. Oh, wait. If you do, please wave your hand. Aniko, go ahead.
Yeah, just one more thing to add to what Kirsten and Pepijn added. I think we can also see it as like how much leverage we can have vis-a-vis this, vis-a-vis FIFA to get some commitment to human rights, you know, for taking part and then for not doing like a campaign on what's happening. I don't really know exactly what is the reality. Just that's just what came to my mind, that it's a big event, you know, a lot of money, a lot of people watching, and even like a small act, what happened in Russia on a football game, someone running in the middle of the, you know, field and then showing some signs and protesting, that can have a big publicity. So in order to avoid that, if I was a state like that, I would be willing to make commitments.
And let's not forget the sponsors as well. I mean, I guess at some point Coca-Cola doesn't want to be associated with, you know, an authoritative regime. So that might, the sponsors might also change a bit in selection of who will organize the tournaments. All right, we still have time for a small last question before moving on to the final statement. This question is to Pepijn. And the question is, what is your perception on EU's approach to a term which I don't know, HRDs, do you know? What? Oh, okay, this is someone who is really, really connected to it. Okay, human rights defenders, yeah, it makes sense. On the EU's approach to human rights defenders inside the EU as opposed to outside the EU?
Yeah, interesting question. I think what we've seen in the last few years is that the EU really stepped up its support, I would say, for human rights defenders, for civil society outside of the EU through their various programs. I won't go into the details of those programs, but that has been massive, I would say. Yet again, there has been fairly low support for civil society organizations and human rights defenders in the EU. And there has been an important change over the last few years. And I must say, thumbs up for the European Parliament in that sense, because they have really pushed for a huge program of 1.5 billion euros for 7 years to support the values and principles and rights of the Union. Very substantial, very important, and let's now see how that will be implemented, because it just has been launched in January. But it is a hopeful sign, I would say, because it gives the possibility for human rights defenders and civil society in the EU to really, well, do its work more intensely, I would say.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you for the answer, and also thank you for the excellent question. In general, I'd like to really thank the audience for the good questions and the input they gave on Mentimeter. We're about to end the event. I'd also like to thank all the speakers, both here, Kirsten, and online, Anniko, Tetjana, Caroline, for their participation. And I'd like to end this event with, again, with Pepijn Gerrits, who is, let me just repeat, Executive Director of the Netherlands Helsinki Committee, for the closing remarks of this event. So Pepijn, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Jelle. I think it's been a very interesting event with, as you said, very interesting questions. And I would like to follow your thanking of the speakers. I would like to thank you as a moderator. I would like to thank Caroline de Gruyter as a keynote, Anniko, Tatjana, and Kirsten as the speakers. Once more, I would like to underline that this event would not have been possible without the support of the Netherlands, the National Postcode Lottery of the Netherlands, and the support we've had here at the Humanity Hub. But most importantly, I think also our partners in 7 countries where these campaigns have been launched. Our partner in Ukraine, Hromadske, who was able to make all the videos, and all the crews in the national countries, especially in these very troubling COVID times. Anna Sherwood and my team here at the NHC, the Human Rights Defense team, and our communications team. Most importantly, the protagonists in all the films we've seen, because without their stories, their brave stories, we would not have been able to actually make this campaign. And thank you so much for standing up and well, being ready to speak out in these campaigns. And last but certainly not least, the audience for attending and being with us here, with having this lively debate. I would like to remind all that we #can bring human rights home. That means to our neighborhoods, our communities, and by extension also to contribute to everyone's enjoyment of these fundamental freedoms. And I very much invite you to follow the #BringHumanRightsHome campaign, to listen to other stories of inspiration, and especially also to share your own stories and stand up for human rights. Because we hope that simply this is the start of a broader conversation about human rights and why they matter. Thank you very much, and hope to see you very soon again.